This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
Okay, so this episode, I'm going to start out with a serial killer. I was going to mention him in the last episode, but we kind of ran long on time because I was ranting about some other stuff. But I wanted to talk about a Welsh serial killer. Do you know much about Wales?
Just a little bit.
This guy is apprehended in 2009, but his crimes take place in the 80s. He's another one of those killers where, you know, he's got a nickname, he's got some confirmed victims, and then he sort of has some possible victims. He's an interesting guy, but I don't think many people talk much about him. Because it's Welsh, it's a little easier to get the translation right on this stuff. He's definitely prolific. Now, he's known as the Bullseye Killer for a really weird reason. He's another one of those guys. I'm sure you've heard of Rodney Akala, right?
I actually don't know.
Rodney Akala is the game show killer.
Yeah, okay.
So I think they call him the dating game killer specifically. He was on death row and he died in 2021. So he died fairly recently. But Rodney Akala is a pretty popular true crime subject. Now, this guy is sort of similar to that in some ways. He was born in September of 1944. And his criminal history starts pretty early. It starts when he's around 16 years old. By the time he was 21, he had been charged with theft of a vehicle, assaulting a police officer, being drunk and disorderly. He had been charged with assault causing actual body harm, which ABH is the charge in Wales. He's, like I said, he's not really that well known. And in April of 2009, he was finally identified by a DNA link to a bunch of earlier crimes. If you look at his kind of his age progression, 1944, he's born. You know, by the time he's 16, we're talking around 1960, he starts committing crimes. In 1978, John William Cooper, he was a farm laborer, and he ended up winning what's known as a spot the ball competition. I thought this was fascinating. Have you ever heard of spot the ball?
I have not.
Okay, so the newspaper will print a photo, and basically they'll remove a ball from the photo, like kind of Photoshoppy, but old school.
Sure.
And you have to guess the exact position of the ball that's been removed. A lot of times they did this with what's known as association football. In the U.S., they call it soccer. It's known as football in Wales. So he wins this competition not once but twice, and his first prize is $90,000 in 1978. So that's $500,000 today. And he also wins a $4,000 car. He had a friend who appears, I think he appears in like a documentary episode about him. And the friend is quoted as saying that John Cooper had developed a huge drinking and gambling problem after he won these two prizes. This is a life-changing amount of money for somebody. And at the time, he would have been 44 is when he was born. This happens in 78. He would have been 33 years old when he wins this $500,000. He spent almost all of his money on gambling. So he was into the bookies. But people were scared of him because he was very violent. And he would get into a lot of fights at the local pubs. And As he ran out of money, which was pretty quickly, he started to rob people. On December 22nd, 1985, Cooper targets a 3-story farmhouse in an area called Scoston Park. And he kills the brother and sister who lived there, named Richard and Helen Thomas. And then he burns down their house. On June 29th of 1989, 4 years later, Peter and Gwenda Dixon were on vacation in the area where he lived. It's called Pembrokeshire. They were taking a walk along the coastal path before they were headed home. This is a really nice national trail in Southwest Wales, and it runs about 186 miles. So it's not like just a standard path, but it's almost like if we had like the Trail to Honolulu or the Appalachian Trail, but it's running like kind of along the cliff tops in Wales. They never come back, but their bodies are later found along the path. John Cooper had tied the couple up, and he had taken their bank card, and he had tortured them to disclose their PIN number. Later on, Cooper, carrying a sawed-off shotgun, robbed Peter Dixon of 300 pounds, and he shot Gwenda in the face at point-blank range, and then he shot Peter. Basically, has become just sort of, I kind of picture him as like a Mr. Hyde character, kind of just this roving monster who's drinking and robbing.
Mm-hmm.
In 1996, he attacked 5 youngsters when he threatened them with a gun, and he sexually assaulted a girl. Like in the middle of this group of 5 people, he sexually assaults one girl, and then he rapes another one. By 1998, police estimated that Cooper had committed at least 30 burglaries and another armed robbery. They had some footage of him from a 1989 episode that aired on May 28th of the ITV game show Bullseye. And the way that show worked is 3 pairs of contestants or teams, which they were made up of a darts player and a person who was called a quizzer. And the teams would compete for different prizes. The show actually aired from 1981 all the way to 1995. So it had a 14-year run, and then it started to be reproduced in 2006. But that version of it only ran for about a year. It's a pretty well-known show if you lived in Wales or in the UK at the time. He's notorious for this appearance because they match him to this old footage with witness sketches from some of these crimes, particularly from the crime where he had the 5 kids together. Here's the links they have to like some of what he had done. Now, we know he killed Richard and Helen Thomas. We know he killed Peter and Gwenda Dixon. For those crimes, in 2011, he gets convicted and he gets sentenced to life. In September of 2011, he appealed it. It took about a year, and then his appeal ends up getting rejected. He was diagnosed he was a psychopath. Like he had an actual diagnosis as having been a psychopath. The UK television series Real Crime, which is similar to what we have over here, that's like Dateline or 48 Hours, sort of a long-running true crime episode where they talk about one crime and they interview like the families and stuff like that. He's on that in an episode in November 2011. And then he was also part of, they talk about him in a documentary in May of 2016 on a Welsh language channel there, S4C, in the series The Detective. And what they talk about there is how the evidence against him had been gathered as the crimes unfolded, and then how technology, as it sort of moved along, made it possible for them to arrest him. Now, he's responsible and convicted for 4 murders, and that's the murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon and the murder of Richard and Helen Thomas, and a lot of associated murders there. He's also responsible for the rape of one young girl, but he has a lot of links to other possible crimes. Now, one of the first crimes that they considered to be his, they run out a description of what had happened to this woman, and they sort of give us details about some of the other crimes in that description. Now, you can find this on the wiki. There is a really cool 3-part television series, if you can find it online, called The Pembrokeshire Murders. They filmed a lot of it on location, and then there was an hour-long documentary that ran with it that I think is on YouTube called Catching the Game Show Killer. And they actually talked to the detectives involved that were part of the cold case unit, some of the forensic scientists who were involved. And they talked to Detective Superintendent Steve Wilkins. He's the person who reopened the investigation and got the reexamination going in 2008 and 2009. So the first sort of over coverage they do is in May of 2011, like after he's been convicted, the police were considering reopening an inquiry into a 1989 death of a woman who had lived nearby. So she lived about 2 miles away from the site of the 1985 murders. This is where he had burned down the farmhouse. There was a woman there named Flo Evans, and she was 72 years old, and she was a widow. She died shortly after the murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. And she had been found fully clothed in a half-full bathtub in her cottage. John Cooper and his wife, Pat, both knew her. And they would regularly visit her at what is known as a small holding. And a small holding is a community farm that basically is shared between several families, and they would come over and hang out with her essentially while I don't want to like downplay it and say she was gardening because it's a little bigger than that. Basically, she was gardening, and Cooper would do odd jobs for her. While Cooper was on trial for the murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon, he ends up mentioning her as part of his own testimony. And during interviews, he discussed how he had been in her house while detectives were already aware of her death being suspicious. Her home was pretty much the dead center of the area in Pembrokeshire where Cooper had been committing his burglaries. Evans' family had long suspected that her death was not an accident. Specifically, they brought up that she never took baths, and the time that this had all happened, she did not have hot water in her house. And there was no fire indicating that she had been like transporting water from the kitchen and into the tub. And also, she's 72 years old. Like, she might have done that once in a while, but it's not going to be a regular occurrence for sure. Her death was officially recorded as an accident, and the inquest found that it was possible that she must have slipped into the bath, hit her head, and then drowned, and the water level just didn't match. Police contacted her family after Cooper was convicted for the double homicide nearby, and they said that there were some things that connected Cooper to the scene, and that they were exploring whether or not he might have been responsible for the death of Flo Evans. Now, in that 2021 documentary I mentioned, the sort of the after show, which was Catching the Game Show Killer, Flo Evans gets brought up, and Detective Superintendent Steve Wilkins, who was overseeing all of this, he said that he believed that Flo Evans was the 5th victim of Cooper. She was a woman who didn't lock her doors, and when the police got there, it was found to be locked. She had mentioned to her friends just days before she was found dead that she had lost her house keys. There were multiple items of value that had been taken from her house, and a shotgun that her husband had owned and that she had kept was missing, as well as some money. Cooper's MO was sort of to burgle the homes of people he knew and knew their houses. And if he was found out, he would react pretty violently. There were several instances referenced in the documentary of him, even though he wasn't discovered, but him like getting into physical fights in the dark with the people who own the homes. Cooper probably would have known where Evans kept her money and her gun. And Wilkins said that Cooper had admitted to being at her house on the day that she died. And he said that Wilkins said that basically Evans' death should never have been just an inquest. It should have been a murder inquiry, which would have given it, like, rather than looking at it like a death investigation or an accident investigation, he felt like it should be investigated as a homicide, which it wasn't. And it bothered Wilkins, at least at the time of the documentary. There was another murder, which is it's a double homicide. It's the murders of Harry and Megan Tews, which is known as the Lee and Harry murders. Have you ever heard of this?
Just researching this case.
Okay. These murders, it was the high-profile killings of an elderly couple, as previously said, Harry and Megan Tews. They were at their remote farm in Wales, and on July 26, 1993, they were shot dead at point-blank range with a shotgun. It was considered to be an execution-style killing. Now, their killer attempted to hide their bodies in the cow shed of the farm, and there were weird things that went on there where their best china was found laid out on a table as if the couple were expecting a guest that they knew. And there was lunch found that had been cooked on and in the stove, but it wasn't eaten. And the lead investigator at the time he called it the most baffling case he had ever investigated. Now, there was a conviction in that case. A man named Jonathan Jones, who was the boyfriend of Harry and Meghan's daughter, he was initially convicted. His fingerprint had been found on one of the teacups, despite him saying that he had never used it. And his alibi had sort of fallen apart. He had claimed that he had spent the day visiting estate agents in Orpington, but there were no estate agents in the area who said that they remembered seeing him or speaking to him. So he was subsequently forced to admit that he had never been to see anybody about any real estate that day. The prosecutors thought that Jones had killed the victims for $150,000 life insurance payment that his girlfriend would get because he was having financial troubles. So a year later, they squashed his conviction, although to this day, no one's ever confirmed his alibi and there's no proof of what he was doing. He also, I think he and the girlfriend were ruled to be ineligible for the compensation from the life insurance policy until he proves that he's innocent. But subsequent attempts to solve the murders have failed to unearth any suspects except for John Cooper. Investigators revealed after his conviction that they were investigating whether or not he might have had something to do with it. It was a little outside of his MO. The thing was, Cooper used a shotgun in his crimes at close range. There have been very few double shotgun murders nationally, and he had committed 2 of them. That case was re-examined, but we're talking 12 years ago. And it gets mentioned in the documentaries. It gets mentioned several places online. But ultimately, we don't know if he did that or not. But it gets, so Flo Evans and then Harry and Megan Tews get us from his known 4 killings. That gets us up to 7 killings. There's another one that goes back a little further in time. There's a death in Pembrokeshire in 1976, an elderly couple. They were found dead in December of 1976. Their deaths were originally classified as a double murder. This is a couple they're 73 and 70. So Griff Thomas is 73 years old, and Patty Thomas is 70. So this is a brother and sister pair. It's not a husband and wife. The way that the inquest goes, they decide that Griff, the brother, gets into an argument with his sister. Now, they've lived together for 70 years, and he decides to hit her on the head with a blunt instrument and set himself on fire. So that's the general gist of what had happened there. The way things work in Wales, they do like sort of these crazy investigations where, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they don't necessarily give a shit if the people are dead. Like they'll still do a trial even if the people are dead.
The
Like,
suspects?
like even if who would be the defendant,
Right.
they'll hold an inquest like it's a trial, and they'll give a verdict that essentially convicts that person even if they're dead. The verdict, which is a little bit lost in translation between Welsh language and English, but it's not that lost. A guy comes on in 2011 on the BBC. His name is Clive Sims. He's a forensic psychologist. He questions the verdict of manslaughter in the case of Patty Thomas and an open verdict in the case of Griff Thomas. So what that means is he says it makes no sense that Griff Thomas in his death has essentially been convicted of the murder of his sister Patty, and he gets an open verdict, which means in the case of Griff Thomas, he either did it to himself or there's no crime. Okay, it was said that Patty was hit by a blunt instrument, but there was no blunt instrument found nearby. The reasoning was that like Griff could have gotten, he could have done away with it. Clive Sims said that the pair was killed by an intruder following what he thought was a botched burglary. This is 1976, so it's 9 years early from Cooper's first known double homicide. But Clive Sims was trying to talk the local police into believing that this would have been Cooper's first double murder. So that, Flo Evans, Harry and Megan Choose, they get us from 4 to 7. And then the deaths of Griff and Patty Thomas are what get us to a possible 9 victims for Cooper. The rationale used here, and I want to know what you think about this. There were missing things in the house. The back door was unlocked. A locked bureau with some jewelry and other things in it had been broken into. Sims' justification for all of this is he doesn't think that somebody that's sort of a serial killer, which I want to ask you about that, would start killing at age 40, which Cooper would have been 41 in 1985. So I want to ask you about that. So first of all, do you think Cooper's a serial killer from what I've described here? If we just take the first four murders, the 2 double murders.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so we're calling him a serial killer. Do you think like a serial killer would suddenly start killing someone at 41?
I don't think so, but I also don't think it's like impossible.
That's sort of where I fall in this. Like I think there has to be a reason for the killing.
What do you mean if they start after 40 or whatever?
Well, yeah, I think there would have to be a big trigger or a big change for them to start after 40.
Yeah.
I get like these killings. Okay, so in Wales, what I've found is a lot of this information that happens to make its way into the media is not as graphic as it is here. Does that make sense? Like they're more guarded with the information?
Yeah, I would have a tendency to agree with that, yeah.
Okay. In order to dig into this further, I would need some official records to know, was he raping one of these elderly people when he was doing this? Because he's got a rape conviction of a younger person, like a teenager. If he had raped Helen Thomas or he had definitely raped Gwenda Dixon, I think we would know if Peter and Gwenda Dixon, if either one of them had been assaulted. But Helen Thomas, I'm not so sure with the whole fire thing going on. Then he's just like a burglar killer, right?
See, I don't know. There's a lot of holes here. I actually, when you were saying that they hold trials for people even if they're dead,
I know that's not. That's the wrong
Even
way
if,
to say it. It's formal
e-
though.
even if the defendant has passed away, they take time. I think they should redirect that and do better investigations because, like, with Flo Evans, I always find it suspicious when a possible suspect presents itself and then they change the cause of death.
Yeah.
Um, like that's weird, right? I mean, she was either murdered or she wasn't. And she would have been, that would have been the, I think from what they presented, it would have been the biggest like diversion, right? As far as like from the shotgun fires, basically. Because she's, they thought she could have possibly accidentally drowned in her bathtub, right? That was
Yeah.
what it was ruled at. So that's really far away from a shotgun murder. Now, you're right that if I don't think he assaulted them, I assumed that he assaulted the children. They weren't children. Were they children or just young adults?
They were. I think the ages were 12 to 16.
Okay, I think he assaulted them because he was mad they didn't have any money. You're right. I do think that he's got this like really weird. Because to me, it's he's stealing money or stuff he can get money with, right?
Yeah.
And that's weird, and that would make him less of a serial killer to me because when the motivation is clearly money, it changes things. As far as like what his mentality would be, because once you're killing people for even like this, it seems like it was pretty small amounts of money to be killing people. Um, it changes that to me.
Yeah. So like when I think of serial killers, like so Wales had their first Welsh serial killer and a guy named Joseph Capon, who I am very familiar with, but unfortunately he'll probably never show up on the show. In a nutshell, he was known as a Saturday Night Strangler. And what he would do is take a teenage girl, rape her, and kill her. This all happened in Port Talbot. The bulk of his crimes took place between 1973 to 1976. He's one of those that has one of those open-ended numbers. Like they know for sure he killed three young girls, but they suspect, and these were, I'm hemming and hawing on that because they're 16, 17, 18 years old. They're kids. He rapes and kills them. And that's pretty clear cut a serial killer for me. And he had he was physically abused. He was physically abusive. He killed dogs. He messed with fire. All of the things that you can imagine. Like he fits what I think of as a traditional sadist, rapist, serial killer, predator. This guy doesn't. This guy's more of a robber killer.
He is, and I think what changed him was like winning the money, right?
Oh yeah, he went like way the wrong way with that. Yeah,
and I think he got in like really far over his head, which is that's very common. That something like that is very common to happen. Like here, it would be compared to like all the lottery winners that end up filing bankruptcy or worse, like within a certain amount of time after they've won the jackpot.
yeah.
But I don't know what he was like before then. There's not a whole lot of like his early life that's readily available, right? It kind of starts with that, and then I mean he did have some at least mischievous things, and I believe it said he had assaulted a police officer, right?
Yeah, he had an early assault on a. He was not even. I think he was 18 years old when he assaulted a cop, and that became like a huge deal for him. And
Right,
then after
and
that, he started getting like petty shit.
well, and so that could go like a whole lot of ways. I know a lot of times it can. Some people do assault police officers and hurt them and intend to hurt them, but sometimes police officers get in a scuffle and they're acting like it was an assault. I don't know what happened there. He was young though.
Correct.
Cooper was, right?
Yeah.
And so once he started randomly winning that money, which is it's so bizarre to me, I think that he may have been, especially. I feel like he just was disappointed in the way like life was going, right? After he had won money, and then like I assume he didn't have money anymore, most likely because he gambled it, or
Yeah, he gambled it all away.
they alluded to all that, right?
Yeah.
And then after he's committing burglaries and robberies, and I've always felt like it's not that they can't do it, it's just like, burglaries and robberies have a very, very different, I'm sorry, a burglar versus a serial killer are two very different things, right? A robber or a burglar. I don't know, it just, does it say anywhere that he did drugs?
It doesn't specify anything more than alcohol.
Okay. And so, that would lead me to believe he was, I wonder if like more victims, I don't want to victim shame, but like more cooperation, or if he hadn't lost his temper, like would he have committed the murders if he had gotten what he wanted out of the burglary? Like, I don't know if that's the way it escalated.
I thought about that. This is my thinking on it. I think he's killing the witnesses.
And he didn't kill all the witnesses.
No, he didn't. That's why I get a little backwards on this. But
well, to me,
if he's killing him for killing the witnesses, does that make him a serial killer or no? I'm saying if that turned out to be the case.
I don't actually know, because anytime I see a situation where they're not killing all the witnesses, it makes me think that there's a contributing factor to why, like, some people he robbed lived and some people he robbed didn't live.
Well, that's why I started with Harvey. That was the whole reason that he was the first one up, because I was curious.
The contributing factor would be something like, that could be anything, but I guess like making him mad, him losing his temper, something.
You mentioned not having money as well.
Well, but he didn't kill those girls, did he?
No, he
assaulted them.
Yeah, there were 2 sexual assaults. One was a rape. One was defined as a sexual assault.
Right, and those were young females, or young adult females, young teenage females, and it's possible that could be why he, in that case, that was the only sexual assaults, right?
That's the only one he's charged with. And I'll tell you this, you can watch it in the documentaries if they're like super interested in these cases, but they don't go much further. Finding out what forensics they used was really confusing to me, because I wanted to know if they had semen at the scene. And I mean a guy standing in the corner. Like, some serial killers don't actually rape the victim, but they still get sexual gratification from the scene. And frequently you can find that they have ejaculated somewhere on the premises. I wanted to know if they did that or if they were just doing fingerprints and hair. And overall, I cannot tell, beyond that one girl that is confirmed as a rape, I cannot tell if he does not have any other convictions, like legal matters related to a sexual assault beyond that incident.
See, so I really don't know. I feel like I don't think a serial killer has to be motivated like a state. I don't feel like it has to be a sexually motivated crime. But I give pause when because he could have just genuinely been attracted to the girls that he attacked. And that doesn't make them not victims. They're absolutely victims. But that could have been why he did what he did to them. Without the context, we don't really know, right? Because it doesn't say like he attempted to rob them, does it? It's a very it's like he attacked them, he had a gun, and he ended up being charged with sexually assaulting one and raping the other, but it doesn't say that he tried to rob them, right?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. And I looked. There's like 6 sources I found for that. None of them reference exactly what he did. I will say there was one archived article that I'll use. I'm just trying to get at like what his motive might have been if it wasn't, because I mean I believe a serial killer, I guess, can be a robber and there can be more to it. I definitely think that Flo Evans and then the other brother and sister pair are him, if that makes sense. Like just it would be so weird for it to be anyone else.
Well, but Flo Evans was ruled an accident.
Correct. He didn't shoot her.
So, did he drown her?
No, I think they struggled in the course of him trying to rob her house, and he ended up.
And so that would be different as well because
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Didn't
Like,
know the other victims, right?
yeah, I think. Well, no, he did. He knew some of them. Like that was well. He knew his burglary victims. Like he knew all of them. So here's what I'm going to read to you, and you tell me if this changes things for you. This is from a woman named Katie Stollard. She was writing at the time for Sky News, which is, a British website. She was the West of England correspondent in May of 2011. And here's what her little article says. A grandfather has been handed 4 life sentences for 2 double murders and a violent sexual attack dating back decades after footage from TV show Bullseye was used to help identify him. John Cooper from Milford Haven, Pembrokeshire, murdered brother and sister Richard and Helen Thomas in 1985 and Peter and Gwenda Dixon in 1989. He went on to attack a group of teenagers in 1996, raping a 16-year-old girl and sexually assaulting a 15-year-old friend at gunpoint. Cooper, now 66, has previous convictions for armed robbery and served a 10-year sentence after being sent to prison in 1998. The killer repeatedly tried to shout over High Court Judge Mr. Justice John Griffith as he was sentenced in Crown Court. The judge said the murders was of such evil wickedness that the mandatory sentence of life will mean just that. I am confident you will never express any remorse and so help the victims come to terms with their loss. You are a dangerous man who is highly organized, predatory, burglar, whose hallmarks were balaclavas, which is a mask, gloves, and a shotgun. Each of your offenses were well planned, and so it was you who evaded arrest for so long. Indeed, but for the advances of forensic science, you may well have never been brought to justice. Then it kind of breaks down what happened. Siblings Richard, who was 58, and Helen, 54, were attacked in their home near Milford Haven in December of 1985. Mrs. Thomas was found entangled in rope with a man's shirt tied around her head as a blindfold. Her brother was marched and killed in the outhouse of the property. Police believe that he had come home early and he interrupted the attack on Helen. Both were shot at close range and then doused in diesel before the house was set on fire. In July of 1989, Peter Dixon, who was 51, and his 52-year-old wife Gwenda were murdered as they walked along a coastal path in Pembrokeshire. They had been on the last day of their camping holiday near the beautiful village of Little Haven. It was a damp morning, so they had decided to go for one final walk along the tourist trail while they waited for their tent to dry out. Wearing a black balaclava and brandishing a sawn-off shotgun, Cooper accosted the couple in the path and forced them to make their way down a steep gully towards the cliffs. In a small clearing, screened from the footpath overhead by trees and undergrowth, he tied up Mr. Dixon, then sexually assaulted his wife.
Oh, okay.
He then made them hand over their bank cards and their pens before shooting them both several times at close range. The killings were described in court as merciless executions carried out for pitiful financial gain and Cooper's sexual gratification. John Cooper is an evil man, said DCS Steve Wilkins, who led the case for the local police. John Cooper was a man who thrived on control, his ability to control people, and his ability to control his environment. He was an individual who could live within the family home a relatively normal life, and the next moment display the most disproportionate amount of violence and be prepared to kill. In a bizarre twist, Cooper had appeared on the TV game show Bullseye the month before he murdered the Dixons. Detectives compared footage from the show with an artist's impression of a man seen using Mr. Dixon's bank card in the days after the shootings. The TV clip was played in court to show the jury what Cooper looked like at the time and how he compared to the police artist's sketch. Local police began a cold case review of the crimes in 2006 after advances in forensic science techniques offered new techniques to examine the original evidence. Scientists at LGC Forensics made the breakthrough when they found a tiny fleck of Mr. Dixon's blood on shorts found in Cooper's home and, crucially, on the barrel of his shotgun, even though it had been cleaned and painted over. The key elements of the DNA evidence were finding the blood on the shorts and also finding the blood underneath the paint on the shotgun, which matched that of Peter Dixon. In 1989, DNA profiling wasn't in existence, and these were all techniques that were only really available to us in the past 5 years or so, and in those days, they just weren't available, said lead scientist on the case for LGC, Dr. Philip Avenel. Cooper has always maintained his innocence and has yet to show any remorse for his crimes. So he was sexually assaulting them, and the DNA was the blood evidence.
Right?
I'm glad I was able to find that. The thing it's archived, so it took forever to load.
Okay, so my question to you is, he assaulted the 5 teenagers in March of 1996. So why didn't he kill any of them?
I don't know the answer to that question, and it's one of the things that always bothers me, by the way, when I can't find some kind of consistency between people. But I have to remember that these criminals can sometimes just be idiots. You know what I mean?
I agree. And then, so the Dixons were taking a walk,
Yeah.
right? The other couple, they were at home, right?
Correct.
I'm sorry, the other ones were brother and sister, not a couple. The Dixons are the couple.
The other pair, yeah.
And then Richard and Helen Thomas are the siblings. And so they were at home. And so to me, I wouldn't have put those together necessarily. But they do have the shotgun blast, right?
Yeah.
Because it is a strange, it is close range shotgun killing it doesn't happen that often. Double is what they were saying was the comparison, right? Where 2 people are shot by a shotgun at close range. And because that's a particularly damaging.
It's a big
right?
weapon. Yeah.
It's gonna cause a big mess, and it also speaks to the heinousness of the perpetrator, right? And so, okay, so were Richard and Helen related to Griff and Patty?
I don't know. You're talking about the names?
Yeah, because so he was convicted of he's convicted of killing Richard and Helen, right? In their home, their siblings, John and Peter and Gwenda Dixon were on a walk. So and then he's suspected of possibly being involved in the death of Griff and Patty Thomas. Have I completely messed this up?
I don't think so. Why?
Well, Griff and Patty are siblings, right?
Griff and Patty and Richard and Helen.
So they're both pairs of siblings.
Right.
Okay. And so I would be interested to know if they are related to the other ones.
I don't know the answer to that.
I know. I just, and so that would have put him substantially younger starting, which is the whole point of why it comes up, is because the investigator felt like it might explain an earlier start as opposed to a 40-year-old starting to be a serial killer. And that's interesting. That confused me for a second because all that was happening.
He was so he's married this whole time with a kid, by the way, and he's abusive to them. And ultimately, if you watch the Pembrokeshire murder, which is it's like I don't want to say it's fictionalized because it's true crime, but it's like true crime drama. It's like people playing the roles, but not a reenactment. It's like a pretty cool series with some pretty big actors in it. They make it look like, so in 2005, like they start kind of looking at solving those murders, and like by 2008, 2009, they're pretty sure it's him. But they find evidence. Like there's this one scene where like he's so evil to his wife and so controlling, and she's just trying to like hem up his shorts. Anyways, when she hems up his shorts, she inadvertently seals the blood in the cuff, and that comes out. I don't know if that's actually how it happened, but it's how it happens in the BBC series. And I thought that was pretty fitting and ironic. I just wanted to know if you thought maybe he was killing them because, they were witnesses to it all.
Well, yeah, and I guess that could be the case. Yeah.
So I'm gonna move over from this guy John Cooper, which he's got an interesting story. People don't talk about him a lot in the U.S., but there is some coverage. There's interviews with his son, and his son has changed names, so I don't know if like he's. I saw it in the court documents, but they use a different name and how he's older, but they still use a different name in how they present him. So I don't know if he's hiding in the world or not. I don't want to say a lot about that, but so there's a series you can watch on. I think it's online. And then there's like a documentary afterwards that sort of explains what you and I were just talking about. It's a pretty cool look, and it does relate back into all of this. Now he's not a one-ad killer, so I don't want to get that wrong. How he came up in the course of the investigation of me looking for classified ads killers and one-ad killers was because he had won that stupid Spot the Ball game. He's listed as someone connected to like newspapers, and at first.
Oh.
Does that make sense? Like it's kind of a weird thing that he does there when he wins that Spot the Ball thing. That's how he ends up in the mix of all this. But also I was using him to transition back in time because we're going all the way back to like the early 80s now. But
okay, well, first I have to say something because you brought it up and then you swung back. So you mentioned that Americans call football soccer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to point out, I learned this fact. I didn't, it's not my fact. It's just a fact that in the early 1800s, football and rugby existed as different variations of the same game.
Yeah.
And in 1863, the Football Association was formed to make uniform rules so that more kids could play it together. And so in 1871, the Rugby Football Union followed suit. So you've got the Football Association and the Rugby Football Union, and they're the two official sports. And
official sports of
England.
Oh, okay, I got you.
So rugby football and association football is what it's called, and so it was beginning to become, commercial, and like they were trying to make it into leagues where it can become a thing for young boys at schools to do. It ends up being that in England, the aristocratic boys, they started shortening it to the terms rugger for the rugby football and soccer for the association football. And so it actually, so America didn't come up with soccer. If you look at the word association, because you can't very well use ass, right?
Yeah, it would be SOC. Yeah, no,
So anyway, so it was rugger and soccer. And so it's actually a misconception that we named it soccer. And the reason this all comes up is because we looked it up during the World Cup, which just happened in Qatar over basically the holidays. There was a ad that David Beckham was in where he says he owns a soccer team, right? And David Beckham's from England. And anyway, it's a whole thing. And Peyton Manning is in the commercial as well. It's really funny. But anyway, I looked it up because of this. My husband's a huge soccer fan, and I watch a lot of soccer because of that. And that is the origin story of the word soccer. It is the shortened, it's the abbreviation that somebody pulled out of the word association, and then they erred it. So rugger and soccer.
I figured if anyone knew, it would be you, because you guys have like, I don't know, so I watch soccer, but I don't know like a lot about the world version of it. You guys have like a dedicated channel in your house where you can watch it, don't you?
Oh yeah, so if there's a soccer game in the world happening, it's on at my house usually.
Yeah. I've been over there in the basement before, and there's games going on. I'm like, is it even the season for the sport?
There's always soccer being played somewhere, like whether depending at if it's league soccer or if they're like going through the championships to make their place for the World Cup, or there's always soccer being played. I don't mind watching it. I actually get into it quite a bit, but especially for the World Cup, that's huge. But it's more my husband's thing. But I just thought that was very interesting. And I like to look in, I like to investigate stuff. But to go from like football to soccer, I was like, how does that even happen? Right? Because soccer is not actually a word. And that explained it. The association, the SOC, and then they were just adding it. And it was a way they could tell their friends in a quicker fashion if they played rugby or if they played football.
That is interesting.
It is interesting.
I'm gonna leave that in here. But unfortunately, we're out of time for this week. So we're gonna have to come back to the serial rapist in Tampa next week. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would ask if you guys like the show, please share the show, or you can go onto your favorite podcast app, whether it's Apple or Google or one of the more interesting apps, Spotify, Overcast. We're on all those different things. If you could go on there and leave us a rating or a review. I'm not going to ask you to leave us a 5-star review, but like whatever you think of the show, leave an honest review of the show because that will help us to grow our audience in season 4. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time. This is Crime
It's sort of weird for me to like hear back on some of these episodes. We have a very long serial killer thing we put together here, and I was trying to play to some of the personality stuff and trying to play to some of the case stuff. The bottom line is we were doing a couple of different things here that it was requested of us. We had some other projects going on, and it's related to that in some ways. So I've been asked to limit like some time limits and go over on others and like look at what like ad placement would sound like and some things related that they're not very true crime. I'm just putting them in here because I wanted to see what the listener retention was and really to see if I even liked it, because if I don't like it, I don't want to put it in there. But that's how some of this is running at like odd times. I think that people will enjoy the season once they see the killers that we've been researching. But for now, I really do have to sort of bounce around a little bit in order to see what the structure and the format of the show looks like.
Show me to slow down, 'cause I've been going too fast for my own good now. So I'm hoping I can see the light in your eyes and feel it in the good light with you by my side. Carry me wherever you go, wherever you go. Carry me wherever you go, wherever you go. Show me how to slow down, 'cause I've been going too fast for my own good now. So I'm hoping I can see the light in your eyes and feel it in the good light with you by my side. Carry me wherever you go, wherever you go. Carry me wherever you go, wherever you go. We got all summer, we got so much time getting to know each other. You're always on my mind. We got all the summer, we got so much time getting to know each other. Carry me wherever you